Hello and welcome to the Small Agency Show. I'm Chip Griffin, the founder of the Small Agency Growth Alliance and the host of this show. And I am very happy to have with me for this week's edition, Patrick Rogan of Ignition HR. Welcome to the show, Patrick.
Well, thank you, Chip. It's a pleasure being here.
Regular Saga listeners will know that Patrick makes regular appearances on podcasts, webinars, and live streams because he has lots of great insight on all things HR and talent related, which I know most small agencies are worried about. So we'll have a great conversation today. But first, you have to watch the little quick intro that we've got. See, now doesn't that feel all professional and everything? And it covers up for the fact that we had a few technical gremlins, which is why we're starting a couple of minutes late. But hopefully people will pardon the appearance there and enjoy the content, because we do have some great content coming up here. We're going to be talking about some of the hot button issues that a lot of organizations are having to deal with, diversity, equity, inclusion, some of the regulatory changes that may be coming down the pike with the new administration, at least here in the United States. But, we'll also be talking about other things that are on your minds. So feel free to use the comments or chat function on whatever platform you're watching on and send your questions in. So Patrick, first, why don't we talk about some of those regulatory changes, right? You follow very closely what's going on. We all know here in the United States, we've had a change in administrations, and it's a change in an approach to, various issues, including labor issues. Historically, small agencies, small employers have been exempt from a lot of these things, but
Right.
I understand there's some talk that small employers may have some more requirements put upon them.
Yeah, it's still a little bit of a guessing game. I think that one of the things that's standing out a little bit is that there are some questions that are starting to sort of solidify a little bit in terms of answers. So the Biden administration has made it very clear that diversity, equity, and inclusion are going to be hot topics. But up until just in the last week or so, we haven't really been able to identify, well, what specifically in there should we as business owners be paying particular attention to, and how is it going to impact small organizations? So the first one on the list that's popped up just in the recent week or so has been FMLA, the Family and Medical Leave Act. Previously, that really applied just to organizations with 50 or more employees. It relates to protecting roles for employees who need to take time off to deal with an ill child, spouse, or self. And from a federal perspective, it's applied to organizations with 50 or more employees. The Biden administration is indicating now that they're going to lower that number to a smaller number. Will it be 15? Will it be 50? It's hard to say, but I think that it's something we want to pay attention to. And my guess is there are going to be others that are going to apply as well. But that's one that out of the box that's popped up, and I think we ought to probably pay attention to. The implications, of course, is if you have a small business, it's a little tricky, because if you have an employee that needs to leave, and we want to be accommodating, you don't necessarily have to pay them while they're on leave, but you do have to hold their job. If that's a key role to an organization and you just have a few employees, you're going to have to be very careful in terms of how you manage that. So who's going to do that work while that employee is out? And then when they come back, how is that going to work? Is there a contractor you could perhaps fill in? These are some things that smaller organizations need to start thinking about. It isn't finalized yet, but it's a good time to start thinking about, if you have someone who's going to be leaving for medical leave, how are you going to fill that position? And then the other caveat I always have to say with all of these is, keep in mind there are certain state and local laws that may impact FMLA leave in your particular location. So California is one. Washington, D.C. is another, where they have very specific rules to their location that impact both the criteria for FMLA leave as well as how much leave they get to take. So just kind of keep that in the back of your mind.
And that's a great point. You really do need to know what all of the local rules and regulations are. And so whenever you're putting together an employee handbook, employee policies, those kinds of things, you should work with someone like you or an
Right.
employment attorney or someone who understands what those nuances are to keep you out of trouble. And frankly,
Right.
if you have any questions along the way, you should pick up the phone and call someone and say, hey, does this apply to me? Do I need to be
Right.
worried about this? I know, over the years, I've had plenty of occasions where I've picked up the phone and called you or someone else who knows what's going on and said, hey, I'm about to do this. Am I about to step in it, or is everything going to be okay? And of course, just like I do with my own clients, you and all the lawyers I've ever worked with say, it depends.
Right.
And hopefully you'll be okay at the end, but we don't know. We don't know.
Well, it's a kind of thing too, Chip, if you get in front of it a little bit, so particularly if you know what the requirements are ahead of time, then if the situation pops up, then you know what you have to do and how to deal with it,
Right.
or who you can call to give you the options. But I know, like yesterday, for example, I was on the phone with one client talking about this particular issue, and I had another client, I saw them calling in on my phone, and I was like, oh boy, but it's good. It was the same thing.
Yeah.
So they were talking about their requirements and related to employee handbooks specifically. Incidentally related to them, just because this is fresh in mind, keep in mind your location may be a little bit different now in terms of compliance for COVID reasons. So we have a lot of employees now who are working from home when they weren't before, and that might be in another state that they previously worked in when they were working in your office. So keep in mind, your compliance relates to the state where the employee is working. So just
well,
another
I mean,
thing
that's a great point, and I know that a lot of small agencies don't necessarily always think about those things. Frankly, even some larger businesses sometimes
Right.
run afoul of those circumstances. But far more agencies now have employees who are dispersed geographically. It's become very easy from a simple payroll standpoint to have employees wherever, right? I mean, you've got services like ADP or Paychecks that, you
Right.
basically just, check a couple extra boxes and you can pay someone in a new state. But that doesn't mean that you're fully compliant with everything. It just means that you can do tax withholding properly.
Right. And also bear in mind, it might get a little bit more complicated for your employee and their tax liability, because, in certain cases now we have multiple states who are trying to get state taxes. The business is located in, say, New York City, and
Right.
the employee lives in New Jersey. New Jersey is going to try and get it. New York's going to try, it can be a little bit challenged too. So the more accommodating we can be, the better. But it is getting complex. One of the phone calls yesterday was with an organization. They have 14 employees, which is a critical number. And I asked them, so what states are your employees working in? They're like, well, everyone's working from home. I said, okay, so the company is in Maryland. I said, so are they all in Maryland? They're like, no, there's 2 in Maryland. I was like, uh-oh. What are the other states? They rattled off 5 other states, one of which is California. It's like, okay, so it's going to be a little bit more complicated to get your employee handbook put together because there's compliance in each of those states, which we'll have to address. And I got the big eyes.
Right. Well, and right now there are battles going on between states as to how to count where the employee is actually working, right? Because a lot of folks, may be working from home, not because either their employer has chosen it or even they have chosen it, but simply because of restrictions related to COVID.
Right.
And so, I mean, we're seeing this where I live in New Hampshire, where you have
Right.
people who live in New Hampshire but previously worked in Massachusetts. Are they still subject to Massachusetts tax withholding, even though they're not crossing the border anymore to go into the office?
Right.
But the flip side of that is, are they now subject to New Hampshire employment law instead of Massachusetts? So I think a lot of these things aren't fully sorted. So, my guess is there will be court cases for years to come over some of these things because, well, full employment for lawyers, right? So
Yes.
But at the end of the day, part of what you have to do as a small business owner, a small agency owner, is to think about, how do you address the requirements and mitigate the risk. But part of it is, how do you do right by your employees? And I know that a lot of agency owners who may be running businesses that are small enough to be exempt from things like FMLA, even perhaps under new regulations, still want to do the right thing. But you made a great point earlier about the challenge in a small organization when someone goes out on leave in particular. How do you hold that job for them and still get all of their work done? And this is something that I've confronted numerous times over the course of my career, working either in small teams within larger organizations or just running my own small companies. And that really is a delicate balancing act, because you want to do right by the employee.
Right.
But at the same time, how do you do that without having all of your other employees upset about shouldering additional work? You can't just hire someone usually on a temporary basis very easily to bring them in, at least not at a reasonable rate. So how do you address those kinds of things? I mean, that's a real challenge that folks have.
Well, and that's part of the reasons why the family medical leave requirements have characteristically been adapted towards a number of employees just for that reason. And I think the default is, even though you're in a state where the federal guidelines apply and you have less than 50 employees, let's say you have 15 employees, and you have an employee who's going to be out for a period of time for a family or personal medical related issue, if you can accommodate that, even if you don't have to, I think it's certainly in the business's best interest to do that. And I find I get that question a lot, and my first response is, from a business perspective, what makes sense here? Can you accommodate this? Is there a way you can get by? And from a relativity perspective, about what are we talking about? The federal guidelines allow 12 weeks, but if a person really only needs 3 weeks, is that something that you can get through, from a business perspective? If the answer to that is yes, then go ahead and accommodate. That's fine. But
it's a no-brainer, right?
Yeah, but if it's a key employee and there's a major deliverable to do, and how are you going to do it? You just have to sort of take it on a case-by-case basis, just the way it is right now. But recognize that may change. Those requirements may change, and if that is the case, then I think it's important for the business owners to think through, well, how do I prepare for this? How do I get in front of this? So those are the conversations that I tend to have a lot.
Another area where small agency owners I know want to do the right thing, but from my conversations with them, they don't always know exactly how best to go about it, are anything related to DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion. This is real hot button. It's received a lot of additional attention, deservedly so, over the last 7 or 8 months. Large businesses, I think, are that they have people who are focused on developing programs internally, policies. As you get to smaller organizations, they're smaller teams, which on the one hand makes it so that they can be more flexible. On the other hand, some of the solutions that work for larger employers don't work for smaller ones. Right. If I'm running a small agency and I've got 5, 10, 15 people, how do I think about applying best practices for DEI to my own team, to my recruiting practices, and all those kinds of things?
I see that. I get questions about this all the time, and particularly in agencies that have started small and they're gradually getting bigger. I mean, starting a business for most people is the same. You need to piece it together. You typically call on people who can help you, who you can trust. And as your business continues to grow, if you've had success with that, then you tend to, well, let's not change that. I know other people I can bring, so let me bring them into my organization. And the problem with that is, inadvertently, 2 things happen. One is, eventually you're going to, as many contacts as you may have, you're going to run out of people to pick from, to bring into your organization.
Oh, come on, just hire all your friends.
Yeah. So while referrals, I think, are a great resource for finding talent, and I recommend that. I think it's important to broaden the base, because if you look at things from a diversity and equity and inclusion perspective, as long as you're casting the widest net possible, as long as you're looking at the largest number of candidates who could potentially be a fit for your position, and you hire the best person for that, based upon criteria that totally fit to the role, then the numbers are going to work out for you. The problem is if you're looking from a very small pool, and maybe it's people you know who are perhaps in your same socioeconomic background, to get diversity is going to be a little bit harder. And at some point, particularly as the organization starts to grow, I recommend, instead of just calling your friends to say, hey, I think you'd be a fit for this role, the better question would be, hey, I have this role. It's critical for my organization. Who do you know who you think might be a good fit for this? And then now all of a sudden you're broadening the net. So broadening and looking at a larger base of candidates for positions, particularly as you're growing, can really help the organization become more diverse and also open you up to better talent, which is good for the business at the same time. So you can really accomplish both. But I think it's important to recognize you have to be proactive when you do that. It's not going to naturally happen. And every business owner has a million things going on, but this is the one I recommend spending a little bit of time with. Does that make sense?
It does. I mean, I think what I'm hearing you say is that you really have to be much more proactive in your recruiting practices in order to achieve your DEI goals, right? You can't take the easy way out if there ever were one in hiring, and you really need to to push past what you know and get a little bit into the unknown from a network perspective in order to to really cast that broader net. And I guess, I mean, let's dig a little bit into the weeds there, because one of the challenges that I've always had as a small employer has been, what do I use beyond my network that gets me quality candidates that are easy enough to sort through, let's say, right? So we've all used things like Indeed or Monster.com or LinkedIn job listings, and a lot of these generate massive numbers of unqualified resumes. And as a small employer, you don't have the time, the wherewithal, the resources to go through them in a meaningful way. How do you recommend that small employers do their recruiting and get outside of their own personal network in order to find those qualified candidates?
Sure. So there are a couple that come to mind really quickly. One is, if you actually do want to tap into posting sites like Indeed or LinkedIn or others, most of them have options for you to ask questions of candidates that will kind of narrow down that pool. So how many years experience do you have in X? And you leave it open. They have to pick a number to put in, and the number that you're looking for. So those are things you can do to kind of narrow it down from that respect. But also social networking in terms of tapping into people if you have 500 plus people, like most of us do in LinkedIn, that you're connected to, probably 75% that you actually know, 25% perhaps you're being polite to. That's a great resource that you can tap into to send out an email quickly or a LinkedIn message to people hey, I'm looking for a person with these 3 skills. Who do you think that might be a fit, and can we schedule some time to chat about it? Those are ways I think you can get out quickly and cast that broader net. There are others as well too. I mean, not everything is LinkedIn. There are other social networks you can tap in as well too, that I think will help you to kind of broaden that base a little bit. But I wouldn't, even a small organization, I wouldn't discount using the job posting services. I'd just be more careful in terms of how you do it.
I think that's a great tip to basically make it harder for people to apply on some of those services, right? Yeah. I mean, that's part of the problem is, a lot of the platforms have gone out of their way to make it easy for job seekers to apply for jobs. And on the one hand, I guess that's a good thing for their primary user, right? But at the same time, it's tough because, if I'm on LinkedIn and I can just click that, apply for job button, and I don't have to fill out anything. I don't have to write a cover letter. I don't actually even have to, I mean, in some cases you can do it without even uploading a resume. It literally just basically emails your profile to the prospective employer. And that's how you end up with a lot of these cases where you just have so many applicants to go through that you can't do a good job if you're in a 5, 10, 15 person organization.
Right. Yeah. But one of the things, like, requiring someone to do a cover letter,
Right.
we'll weed people out, because some people, they're just clicking, they're just, they're doing the mask, get the resume out. So don't waste time with them as candidates. If they haven't taken the time to write a cover letter and do a little research on your organization, are they really worth your time?
Right. Now, I mean, how do I, well, actually, before I get to an interview type question. So, as I'm thinking about, casting this wider net, I mean, does the current circumstance help? And by that, what I mean is, we just talked about how more agencies have remote workers and things like that. It would seem to me that makes it easier for organizations to achieve their DEI goals, because now they don't have a geographic limitation to their hiring. And for a lot of agencies, depending upon where you're based, finding a diverse applicant pool can be a challenge. I mean, I know that was an issue for me, running businesses in central New Hampshire, right? I mean, the number of people who wanted to go and work in an office in central New Hampshire was, much more limited. Whereas with remote work, you can cast a much wider net.
Yeah, I think it is a big help, and it does automatically give you access to a broader range of individuals to pick from. So I think if you're in an organization where you can be successful having people work remotely, then by default, casting that wider net is going to be a little bit easier. But you also have to think about, the skills of the individual that you're hiring and where you're likely to find them. And I think it's, important to kind of keep that in focus. But if remote working, maybe for at least part of your team is working, then by all means, I would encourage you to kind of look a little bit more broadly than perhaps you have in the past.
Mm-hmm. Now, how would I, as a small employer, how do I incorporate DEI principles into the actual interview process? So, we've got the resumes all coming in, and hopefully we've done something so that, the application process itself, screens out some of the bad fits. But, from that point where you're starting to review resumes and you're starting to do interviews, how do you make sure that you and your team are doing everything they can, to achieve those DEI goals?
Yeah, I think it's important for the interview process specifically. And I see this a lot with smaller organizations when I ask them, what is your interview process right now? What is your selection process? How does that work? And when the organization is going from maybe 3 or 4 people to 10 or 12 people, that's a big jump. At the smaller size, typically the process is, well, someone said this person might be a fit, so I hired them. It's like, whoa, wait a minute. On what basis did you make that decision? Well, it was a good recommendation, or I've worked with this person in the past. And I think that's where a lot of organizations can get into trouble. If you're hiring for your organization and you don't have a huge staff, it's critical that you get the right person for that role. And I think before you even begin the process, you need to spend some time and think through, what are the key skills this individual is going to need to be successful in this role? And what are the demonstrated successes I'm going to need to see this person to have done, that I'm going to ask about, that will give me the indication that they're going to be able to do what I need? So you kind of think a little bit broader. What skills do I need? And then what do I need to ask to find out if they've demonstrated that? And if they have, now you've changed to something that's a little better in terms of asking the right questions of candidates, being able to narrow down a broader pool to a smaller pool that you are reasonably certain is going to fit your need. And you can do it consistently with each and every single candidate. That's the other thing that's really important. I've seen organizations get in companies get in trouble real quickly where, you've got 5 candidates you're interviewing, 2 of which and you spend 15 minutes on the 2 and you interview differently for the ones you don't know. Interview them all the same. You should be thorough if you know someone or if you don't know them. And I definitely recommend, from a DEI perspective, that you use a similar process all the way through for each and every candidate. That's really helpful, particularly if you get audited.
Right. Yeah, that's good advice, unless I hate thinking about audits of any kind. So let's open the lens up just a little bit here as we come near the end of our time together today.
Yeah.
we've talked about some of the regulatory challenges. We've talked about, DEI as one of the top priorities for all employers, including small ones. What else is on your radar screen for small agencies, over, say, the next 12 months or so? I mean, obviously, we've gone through a lot of change in the last 11 months as employers and in the ways that we operate with our workforce. How do we, what else should we be thinking about? What are the other things that your smaller employers are coming to you about right now?
Yeah, one of the questions I'm getting a lot is, as we get to hopefully this post-COVID state, hopefully in the relative near future, one of the questions I get is where's work going to get done from? I'm doing pretty well right now in a distributed work environment, but is that the best model for me in the future? And I recommend my clients think long and hard about that. And I think you need to realize that some employees are marvelously productive, working from home offices because of the way they're wired. And some employees are maybe doing reasonably well in spite of the fact that they're working from their home office, and it's absolutely driving them crazy. And I think, going forward, I wouldn't recommend offices disappear. I recommend maybe their role change a little bit. So if you have some employees who are going to be more effective working from home versus in the office, give them some flexibility, but others are more effective in the office than at home. Like, don't get rid of the office, keep it. Maybe the role is going to change a little bit, but be careful that you're not setting your employees up by failure based upon where they work. I think that's going to be a hot issue going forward.
Well, I absolutely agree. And I think that, there are going to be longer term changes that take place as a result of what's going on. But I think it's important that employers, not have a knee jerk reaction either to bring everybody back as quickly as they can.
Either way, yeah.
Or to just give up on in-person work, right? Because there isn't a single solution that works for every small agency out there. There's not something that works for every individual team member. And
No.
you used a phrase that I think we always have to be careful with, and that's saying home office, because you and I have a home office. A lot of people don't. And one of the challenges is that most of the people who run agencies do. And so they're not necessarily thinking about the fact that a lot of their team members may not. And hopefully they've noticed that over the course of the last 11 months. But I still talk to a lot of people who, are working from dining room tables, or bedrooms or those kinds of things. And it's something we've all had to do because of circumstances. But is it something that people are really going to want to do once we come to the end of this? On the flip side, there are people who enjoy that freedom that they now have, right? And so, my guess is that most employers are going to end up with some kind of hybridized model, probably that leans in one direction or the other, depending upon their circumstances. But I think it's important not to be too reactionary in either direction as you're thinking about what the future of your work for your agency looks like.
Yeah, and keep in mind the culture of your organization is critical for your success. And if it's totally distributed, that's really hard to maintain. Like, it's good to have some core nucleus. And even if people are coming in part of the time and out part of the time, keep that as much as you can, because I think that's the secret sauce for a lot of organizations that they run the risk of losing with no one being together physically ever.
Sure. And even if you're running a fully remote team, you should be thinking about having team retreats on a periodic basis, at least once a year, if not more often than that, where you're able to bring people together. And it's something that you then need to factor in the costs. I mean, I talk to a lot of small agency owners who think, I can shut down my office now, I will save a ton of money. The reality is, if you're doing remote work right, you're going to be just shifting your costs. Instead of paying for leases, you're going to be paying for travel or for offsite meeting locations or things like that, none of which are particularly cheap, but are important for building that team cohesion that you will need in the post-COVID world.
Yep, I totally agree, 100%.
So, well, Patrick, this has been a great conversation. Folks can obviously go to small-agency-growth.com. There are lots of additional resources on these team issues, including a bunch of content that Patrick and I have created previously. But Patrick, if someone is interested in learning more about you or connecting with you directly, where should they go?
Sure. My website is ignitionhr.com. So feel free to go there, and Patrick at ignitionhr.com is the best way to reach me.
Excellent. You've got a good newsletter that has a lot of these issues discussed on a regular basis. So it's a good resource for anyone who is interested in what the HR and talent challenges and solutions might be in the whatever environment we're in from month to month, which seems to be constantly changing, doesn't it?
It does. No shortage of content to write about, that's for sure.
Not at all. And of course, if anyone is watching this and wants to see more of these weekly videos or any of the other content, smallagency.tv will take you right there, and you can subscribe on the YouTube channel, hit the like button if you like what you're seeing. We always appreciate that. In the meantime, that will bring us to the end of today's episode. We'll be back here next Friday at noon Eastern time with another edition of the Small Agency Talk Show. So look forward to seeing you then. And Patrick, look forward to having you back here real soon.
Thanks for having me, Chip.
Thank you.